Good morning. Happy Wednesday. Happy post-Thanksgiving. Happy almost holidays. Happy in between. And I am so excited for this episode today. It's going to be so good. And the reason why it's going to be so good is because I brought in one of my favorite chief sisters, Laura Thornley Hall, who I'll intro and then bring her in. But what you need to know about Lara is she is the chief imposter. She has dubbed that for herself. And why she's done that is because this woman has lived through multiple iterations. We were actually just talking about the ones that continue to show up as imposters. And she's dedicated her career prior to what she's doing now in the corporate world. So tell me she didn't experience imposter syndrome there, the hotbed for imposters. But now she is really responsible for life coaching and helping other executives to deal with their imposter syndrome in order to thrive. So this is like anybody who is listening to this, we've been there and you're welcome. You are welcome, and you are welcome to be here. Thank you so much for joining, Laura. I am just so excited to have you here. And so what I want to kick off this conversation with is the reality of what's going on right now. And we hear this all the time. So recession, layoffs, never something that goes away, but they seem to be heightened at this time of year.
Yes.
Many people are walking into the holiday season with a sense of groundlessness about their work identity, which is the topic that we're talking about as it relates to imposter syndrome and various iterations thereof. So help us understand, like, okay, so this just happened, right? Like, I am that person and it's just happened. What is a human and productive way to handle these feelings as they are, feel like the gut punch and that face? What do we do with that?
Yeah, and one of the most important things to look at here is because we are human, right? We need to allow those feelings. We need to allow the anger, the frustration, the loss, the shock, any of those things. If we think, oh, I've just got to push all of that aside because now I've got to focus on the job search, now I've got to show my best face, we're not taking care of ourselves. We've got to process those emotions first. We've got to be human in those emotions. Otherwise, we'll actually get ourselves stuck in there.
So it's counterintuitive.
It is.
In some respects, right? Because I see this on a regular basis. A lot of people, they want to fill the hole, the hole of the loss, which is very real, right? And so what do? They immediately start pounding on LinkedIn, or not that LinkedIn's a bad thing, but they just want to hit those job boards and alleviate that anxiety that invariably will come up. It's not gonna not show up. It's inevitable.
Well, exactly. And one of the things that the gap that they're trying to fill, that we try and fill, comes back to that work identity, right? And so if your work identity has been so connected to the role and to the organization, and I know Robin Merle talks about the loyalists, right? Because I know a lot of folks. I mean, I was at my last organization for 7 years, and with people I knew there for the 7 years prior to that, when your work identity is so encapsulated in the role and in the organization, you've actually lost connection with the identity of yourself. And so the first thing that you need to do is to pull that back and re-identify your work as the professional that you are.
Right.
Not the person who worked here and the person who did that. That's all anecdotal. but the professional that you are, you need to reconnect with that person, with yourself, and see your identity as the professional that you are. Then you can take it to the world.
Oh boy. Yeah. Right. Like sometimes easier said than done.
Absolutely.
Because I know for me and in the past and even today, I have enmeshed a lot of those identities.
Mm,
And when you when you rip off my arm, of course I'm going to feel like I lost a limb.
right.
And so it's not that easy, but I love that you point that out because it's it's not the first thing that comes to mind because you're wounded.
Mm, mm,
And so I love that you put that there. What are people supposed to do? I mean, it's holiday season.
right.
This is like the rah-rah, like
Mm-hmm,
everybody smile and
mm-hmm,
going to
mm-hmm.
all these parties, or you're engaging with people you may not have seen in a while, certainly family. How do you manage the imposter that might be sitting on your shoulder that is like, well, I really was this, and now I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
how does that actually get processed?
Yeah, so holiday season's interesting, right? Because it is slightly a change of pace, which can be some of the concern and the struggle as well. But then also seeing a lot of people, be their family or friends, often relationships that have gone back a very long time. So
Mhm.
one of the ways to really utilize the holiday season is to actually refocus yourself on those long-term relationships and also on your own values, on your own why. When we pull that together, when we look at what our values are and we look at a strength that we have, and if we put those two things together, that's what we call an internal filter, right?
Mm.
So I'll give an example, right? At the moment, one of my values is connection. And one of my strengths is learning or discovery, right? I love to learn and discover. So when I put connection and learning and discovering together, that creates my internal filter.
Mm.
So when the world is coming at us with the news, with people pinging us from our old organization, the
Oh,
family, the questions, and all of those sorts of things, our brain can process 11 million bits of information per second, right? That's our brain, right? But our rational mind, our conscious mind, can process about 40 to 50 bits per second, right? So this is where the filter is important, right? What we do with that internal filter when we put our value, for me, the example was connection, and a strength like discovery together, we get to filter down from those 11 million bits per second down to the 40 to 50 bits per second so we can make sense of the world, right?
wow.
And just to give an example, I mean, the other thing with holiday season is all of the events. I mean, I don't know about you, my calendar's just blowing up. It's ridiculous. I have double and triple kind of conflicts in terms of events. And that can be the overlap, once again, of the professional, the personal, those long-term relationships, organizations.
Inevitably, somebody's going to say, "Oh, so how's business?" or "What are you doing?" or "How's
Absolutely.
work?" Right? Like
Yeah.
somebody's going to ask you that.
Yep. Yep. And so first, when you're choosing the events, use that filter for me, connection and discovery. So if I've got conflicting events, I'll put them through that filter and say what comes up.
Mm.
But then even when people ask you that question, oh, so how's your job going? How's business? How's this? How's that? I can go back to that filter of connection and discovery and say, well, I'm not with the company I was with last year, but I'm still in touch with a lot of those people. I'm still connected. And at the moment, I'm studying this new program,
Ah, okay.
right?
That
So
that makes sense. And
right, so
you're whole or because of that, right?
exactly. And so you're filtering the information coming in and making decisions about that, but it also gives you a focus when you're sending information out.
Oh, awesome. So I just want to highlight this. Thanks for coming, Jenny Fuss. This example, the previous one that you put together says, of imposter syndrome reminds me of dual awareness, awareness of our internal self and our external experiences. 100%. Yay. Hello, Elizabeth. Thanks for the shout out. I appreciate that. And I know Lara does too. I'll speak for her. So this is really valuable and helpful. Talk to us about the corporate world, right? Because across the board, so many people have been poorly managed. They are poorly managed. In many cases, the company has overhired. And in some cases, they just are not great communicators. And also, you are often left with an exit package, and I know this has happened repeatedly and repeatedly, that has been really disappointing. And so when you're leaving and it feels like, don't let the door shut you on the way out, what is the best way to, I want to say this gently, save face, that doesn't mean be inauthentic, to preserve something like the relationship and leave on a high note, even though inside you're seething and you're like, wow, they must not have thought that much of me. I must be either being let go or eliminated because I was the imposter.
Yeah, and that really comes back to, it's such an individual experience, right? And so there are some great principles that we can use here and I know Robin Mill put those in her book, right, about involuntary exit. That was just an amazing plan of stepping through the different phases. And in a lot of ways, some of these phases very much align with the grief process. Right? And so we always need to be aware that first phase is very often shock, right? Because particularly when we're at the executive level, we kind of would have thought we would have known that that was going to happen.
Of
right?
course.
So that shock can be very, very real. And that really is a time to self-protect, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Because, when you're going through that level of shock, you really need to make sure that you're able to protect yourself for the medium and longer term. So, speaking ill of the organization serves no one, right? But even, in terms of some of the grieving that will happen will be, you have to accept that things are changed and relationships are changed. And, your work best friend or even the work spouse, so to speak, like those very close and very real relationships, they are going to change. And that is going to take some time as well. And grasping back to try and, in that denial part of the grief process, grasping back to try and deny it and to suddenly spend time with people and to expect it to somehow be like it was before, just to have that last taste. That's not going to serve anyone. It's not going to serve you.
It's a slippery slope, right?
Right.
It really is. It's awfully tempting.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I wanted to be like, by the way, you were wrong.
Yeah. So that's where you give yourself some space as well, which, the holiday season can afford in a different sort of a way. And we can certainly make the most of utilizing that as well.
For sure. Excellent. So I want to hit on some of the folks, including myself, who are susceptible to experiencing things like imposter syndrome, and also some of the places that we need to find out when imposter syndrome is more than likely going to get introduced and, of course, reintroduced. Like, who are the classification of people that are vulnerable, and what are the times when it seems to show up more often?
Right. And some of these are surprising, actually. Now, in terms of being vulnerable, Dr. Valerie Young from the Imposter Syndrome Institute, and yes, that is a real organization, has basically said anyone who has been born into this world, anyone who is human, anyone who has parents, that they are susceptible to
Very
imposter.
low bar.
But certainly changes are times when that identity is shaken, and that's certainly a time where we question ourselves. And coming back now, of course, we all use the term imposter syndrome. Syndrome is actually misused a little bit in this. It really is just a phenomenon. It's a collection of thoughts and behaviors that come together at certain times. Just touching on one of the interesting ones that I've found is any change can really cause this shift in our identity and trigger these imposter thoughts, including the big promotion you've been waiting for so long.
Right. So
That's actually a key trigger of imposter thinking.
I'm
Right?
so glad you raised that. So change isn't just change that you didn't see coming.
Mm-hmm.
Change could be something that you forecasted or have been working for a long time, and then all of a sudden it's here, and you're like, WTF? Like,
Yeah.
I know I asked for this, but I'm not really sure I can deliver.
Right. Right. And so there's two key areas or buckets of imposter thinking and the way that it presents itself, right? And one of those relates to our thoughts about ourselves, the I'm not ready, the I'm not enough, I'm not an expert. But the other is the comparative, the sort of, well, I didn't go to that school, or I don't have that degree, or I hear this so often, I'm just a generalist.
Yeah. The just really, that's a telltale sign, right?
Right, right. And so when the thinking relates to that feeling of not enough within yourself, that is one of the sort of areas where that imposter behaviors can really show out. And then, of course, that comparative thinking. And that's why the change is often what triggers that on either side. A change where you start comparing yourself with your new set of colleagues, right? Or those that you perceive are competing with you in the job market, right? That comparison.
Oh,
And then, but also about the way you view yourself and
right.
whether you feel like you're enough.
I have a long-term method or thinking that I go through. I call it the 3 C's: competing, comparing, and complaining. I'm
Mm,
hearing you talk about is that all of these are kind of elements that roll up into this thing where it says, I am not enough. I am acting, I'm not leveling at the place that I need to. So a natural deduction could be, oh, therefore I must be an imposter, you know?
right.
So uh,
Mm,
watch for those changes.
mhm,
What can
mhm,
somebody do to prepare? Like, let's just say it is a promotion and
mhm.
you have been working for it. And so now that you got it, like, are they just a bunch of bozos that did this because you were, demanding it for so long? How do you
Well,
interpret it?
and that is one of those classic areas where imposterism comes out, right? The whole, well, I was a diversity hire, or they don't really understand my skills, or they should have promoted that person, but they just left the organization. So they've just pulled me into the vacuum, all those stories that we tell ourselves. But one of the key things, and this promotion example is really important. One of the key things is if you have an awareness that that's actually the type of situation where imposter thoughts might flourish, right? One of the key things is just to be aware and to prepare yourself a little bit for that, because the key thing that happens with the brain in all of this is, at the end of the day, our brain is a fairly primitive tool in terms of the fight or flight mechanism, right? In terms of triggering that response. what happens when you're not expecting to feel those feelings or to have those thoughts after the big promotion? Your brain thinks something's gone wrong. And it's the unexpected and not being prepared for that, which is one of the biggest concerns. So the first thing is you need to learn to notice some of the signs of imposter thinking, right? Even when it's that comparison, or even when it's looking at yourself, even when it relates to perfectionistic thoughts, like I've got to make this presentation perfect. It's my first one for the board of directors. It's my first time as a C-level person, you know, that perfectionism, that's actually going to be part of where imposterism is coming through, right? Because actually, you don't need to be perfect. You should be prepared, but you also need to be comfortable in your own skin. So notice it for what it is, normalize it, telling your brain, hey, actually, nothing's gone wrong here. You know, I anticipated this might happen. Nothing's gone wrong here. And then neutralize it with, you know, moving yourself into some curiosity. You know, who's one person in the room that I know has my back? What's one thing I can add to this slide that will show my value? That gets your brain
breaking
working
that
back.
down. Ooh, that's really smart. I wish I knew that. So some of the areas that you cover through your organization, and I'm going to put that link here in the chat, it is breaking down a lot of these. It's, you know, a lot of different strains and areas that are in and adjacent to imposter syndromes, like resetting your course, you know, finding agency. So talk to us about what you do. So if I'm like that person, I'm like that person, and I'm feeling as if my imposter syndrome is literally crippling me.
Right.
And I am either not able to show up in my current role, and certainly nothing like being in your in transition, where you're constantly meeting people and trying to, I don't want to say impress them, but make an impact. Right. So how do you help people get through this?
Yeah, so one of the first things we look at in terms of imposterism is, what is the impact, right? We actually first try and solve for the symptoms. And that's important because there isn't a magic wand that takes imposter syndrome away, right? And so we look at two key impacts that can happen and then focus down on solving for those. One impact, which happens more for the perfectionists and the superheroes, are overworking and burning out.
Oh, I know nothing about what you're talking about.
And so a lot of that comes back to reconnection with self. You've got to look at closing the stress cycle. That book Burnout has a lot of good information on that. Closing the stress cycle, reconnecting with self, and reclaiming your agency over yourself, right? Actually remembering that you're the one who knows what's best for you in a situation. And the other part, the other demonstration of imposter syndrome is playing small, right? And this often happens with the natural genius, who all those things happen quite easily, and they're doing this new thing after their promotion, for instance, and it's so hard, and they think, oh, it's not for me. That can't be for me. So they pull back, or they get an opportunity to be a keynote speaker somewhere, and it's sort of like, oh, I'm not the expert there, right? So all these ways in which we play small, right? Then it's really looking at strengthening that core, right? Being more sure about your professional identity, and then being able to put yourself forward and looking at what's the comfort zone, what's the panic zone. And what we actually look at is stretching that comfort zone. What are ways that you can stretch your comfort zone and rebaseline and build your core and your foundation and the way you present to yourself to the world by that level of growth.
Oh, amazing. Because I have heard this, I'm sure you have millions of times as well. A candidate that I'm working with, or client, will go through the entire interview process and have an expectation of a comp level. Then they get to the place where they're thinking, well, I really don't want to rock the boat. I know I said this, and it's not just about the negotiation piece, because that is to some degree very formulaic and clinical. The piece that really gets them is, whoa, now I'm on the hook for asking for this big increase. And then what is the expectation that I'm going to have to deliver? So maybe I need to go into overdrive and, all of that other kind of stuff I need to prove myself, which to some degree I would imagine is very normal. Right?
Exactly. Exactly.
So watch for those signs, watch for those changes, whether you've invited them in or whether they showed up unannounced. Change is a key indicator. We'll wait till, are you feeling okay?
I think I'm all right.
All right, good. Anything else that is a demonstration where that propensity is likely to reoccur outside of change?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the things to look at is the interplay between what happens to our nervous system, right? When we get towards burnout, we really do increase our susceptibility and we reduce our resilience, right? And so what we've really got to look at there is to pull together that restoration so that we can increase our resilience. And that's really going to help, any of those changes that are happening around us, that when we're able to increase our resilience by, reducing the burnout, then we're able to weather those changes a little bit better. But when we keep pushing ourselves towards burnout and our resilience goes down, any breath of wind can really impact us. And so that's really when it comes back to, strengthening yourself and strengthening your core, raising your own resilience. That's where you get back to having your own power, regardless of what's happening around you.
Awesome. So I'm curious, because one of the modules and one of the areas that you teach is, reinventing or reimagining your future self. So these two things sound like they could be in partnership, like, I'm feeling great about myself and I'm all that bag of chips, and now I can go ahead and, create my new future. Or I am gonna, in your words, play small, and my future is just going to be a continuation of, I once went into a job thinking all I really want to do is be competent. I just want to hit the baseline. I just want to go into work and just do my job and not excel. And so I'm curious how you combine the devil of the imposter with the planning of the dream, which would force you to actually eliminate some of that noise.
Right. And so, the imagining of the future self is such a powerful exercise, because what we really do there, reconnecting with the values and with your core and with your passion areas, right? Then we imagine that future self who's really living out those values and that passion. And that can become very specific in terms of roles and titles and those sorts of things. Then we start to write down, who is she? Okay, who are they? What do they wear? What do they think? Who do they talk to? And once you really start to define that future self, and, what are the podcasts they listen to? What are the podcasts they're invited on to speak? Those sorts of things. That future self can become a persona that's quite real and can actually start to inform you.
So I want to flag this. This is really important, because what I heard you say, which I think is very valuable, is removing a lot of the topical pieces. Take the
mm,
title away. Let's take
mhm.
all these other things and strip down to what really like lights you up,
Right,
which
right.
isn't a bunch of hocus pocus woo woo, because
Mhm, mhm.
your inclination as a human being is going to go where you're excited.
Well, 100%, and I mean, talking about that, it's actually Albert Einstein who treasured the intuitive mind and said the rational mind is merely a servant to that.
Mm. And so I'm curious, I was just doing some research too. Do you suggest vision boards? Does vision
Mm,
help to quiet some of the imposter syndrome, or is that something that what could we practically do
mm,
in that
mm.
process of, okay, so here we are, we're ready to thrive. I have some awareness about my imposter syndrome.
Yep.
How do I like kind of keep this thing on guard? How do I keep this thing so that it doesn't contaminate the
Mhm.
dreams of my future self?
Well, it comes back to the individual and their learning style as well. I love vision boards for visual learners. And the process, of course, is also important. But for people who are stimulated by visual things, yes, the vision board is great, because then when you're having those imposter thoughts, you can focus on that. For other people, writing out the characteristics of that future self, and then reading those back, which effectively come like affirmations, right? Because you're actually connecting to those parts that are strong within yourself. For other people, sometimes something like meditation can actually be a good practice for them. So there are some great examples there where people really need to find what works best for them.
Awesome. Because one of the books, and it's always missing here, is I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I am going to throw it out there for anybody else. I've given this many,
Mm.
many times. It's called The Science of Intentional Transformation, about being your future self now. And
Mhm.
it's an amazing, I'll send you a copy. It's an amazing, amazing book that talks about the science behind how to transform.
Right.
And I know for myself that when I am literally in those moments, the feelings that I have been so powerful that they have
Mm.
been able to override a lot of the rational thinking.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
maybe that's because I'm an empath or intuitive. I don't know. I don't know if that
Mhm.
matters. But my point is that there are techniques, and certainly working with you is an opportunity to really map that out. Like really, like I wish I could like shake anyone out here and says, like, please don't play small because of this like asshole called the imposter. Like,
Um,
do not let that really steal that future away from you.
exactly.
In
Exactly.
this holiday season, where it is about giving and it is about celebration, celebrate yourself no matter where you are.
100%.
And really use this time. If you are
Mhm.
feeling like it's coming up, certainly reach out to Lara, but also to invest in the values and the things that are parts of you that no one can take away.
Mhm. Mhm.
Don't take away my
I mean, the
beauty.
air the airplanes have it right, put on your own oxygen mask before you help other people. That's not about being selfish. Fill your own cup so then it can overflow,
That's
right?
right. That's
Mm.
right. Laura, thank you so much for being here. Hang around for a couple
Thanks
minutes
so
more.
much,
And
Connie.
thank you for everyone. The comments have been blowing up, and I'm so, so, so thrilled that we had so many wonderful people join. And it sounds like there was a lot of head nodding for anybody who wasn't commenting, and identification, which we
Mm,
did
mm.
really want to come here today to present a level of normalization around this,
Right.
because like you said, anybody who has parents, well, guess what? You got it. So,
Mhm.
fantastic. Thank you again, and have a wonderful Wednesday. Great episode coming up next Wednesday, and I'll see you then. Bye bye.